Mafia 2 is an open-world story-driven video game about living the Mafia life, killing people, and stealing cars. Mafia 2 is the story of Vito Scalette, an Italian immigrant raised in a 1950s look-alike American city. After his father mysteriously dies of drowning, his family falls on hard times, forcing him into a life of petty crime. After getting caught robbing a jewelry store with his best friend Joe Barbaro, rather than do time in jail, Vito decides to fight in the army. Upon returning home, he finds his family in serious debt. Disregarding the pleas from his mother, Vito turns to a life of crime in order to make money. This is the premise of the game. Mafia 2 is an amazing looking game. The developers seem to have gone an extra mile when they made the city. How weather changes the city is impressive. In the day or at night, when it's raining or in the middle of winter with snow covering the ground, it's all very excellently done. The facial animation on characters is also noteworthy, but sometimes lacking in the non-pivotal moments. Early sections of Mafia 2 do a great job of simulating a living, breathing world. These sections are more linear as a downside, however. Little details help make the world feel more alive. Something as simple as a randomly occurring man attempting to fix his car parked at the side of the road helps in this regard. Mafia 2 uses a chapter-based mission structure. Rather than missions be opt-in, like other open-world games in this genre, everything the player does is part of a natural progression. Since Mafia 2 has such a big emphasis on story, this structure really helps it out. Missions have a nice flow to them. Whether it's combat or driving-based, the activities in the game change often enough that it never gets monotonous. One thing that isn't good about Mafia 2 is the replayability. There is none. After a player beats the game, there's really no more incentive to keep playing. Players can work towards completing all the achievements, attempt the game on a higher difficulty, or try to find all the hidden collectibles, but there's really no point. Speaking of collectibles, the game has two kinds. The first kind is wanted posters. They can be found by exploring the outdoors. The second kind, and this is going to sound weird, is vintage Playboy magazine pictures. It's an odd addition to the game. It doesn't really fit well with the theme or make any sense story-wise. Why does the game ask players to collect nude pictures of women? Another thing to note, there's no incentive to collect any of these collectibles anyways. Mafia 2 is a hard game with a weird difficulty curve. Oddly, the middle of the game is the hardest part. The game is also difficult in a bad way. Deaths in gunfights often feel cheap. When the player dies, they load back to the last checkpoint. Checkpoints can sometimes be spread too far apart from one another, forcing the player to replay long sections of the game if they fail. It's frustrating. The gun combat in Mafia 2 is moderately good. It revolves around a cover system. Everything works fair enough. Enemies always indicate to the player when they're going to peek out from behind cover, giving the player ample time to shoot them. Gunplay mostly consists of killing all the enemies in a room and moving on. One thing that's bad about the cover system is when the player attempts to aim from cover near a corner. They'll either peek out from the side or the top. The problem is that the player has no control over which way they go. It can mess up being able to hit enemies if the player peeks from cover in the way that they didn't expect. The ending of Mafia 2 leaves a lot to be desired. The game simply ends too abruptly and without notice. Players will likely scratch their heads in wonder as they start seeing the credits roll. It's also worth noting that there was a small controversy shortly before Mafia 2 came out about the game's ending. Apparently, there was originally going to be multiple endings, but the idea was scrapped. This may be the reason why Mafia 2 ends on such a low note. One last thing to note about Mafia 2, the racism and sexism. The game takes place in a time when these things were tolerated as the norm. This is just a maturity warning for anyone intending to buy this game. Aside from the pornographic magazine pictures, these things are implemented in such a way as to enrich the experience as a more accurate depiction of the time period. In closing, despite its minor flaws, Mafia 2 is an amazing game. Well worth the time and cost to check out. It's an entertaining game for the person looking to take in the Mafia crime life ideal. To feel like the anti-hero in a more lawless and corrupt time in history. My score is 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Au revoir.
They say he was disagreeable as usual, grumbled something about mortgage payments and overtime. Oh, then he fell asleep. I ask for the simplest things sometimes and he doesn't even try to make me happy. My husband didn't even buy me diamonds for our anniversary. Can you imagine? They just don't understand. I don't know why we ever decided to put up with them. You know, I've been thinking about that and I have an idea. We should both become lesbians. Ooh, lesbians! That sounds exciting. I read about them in my magazine. First, let's throw out our makeup, then cut off all our hair. How liberating. Right on. And we'll get our hands on some blue jeans, combat boots, and flannel shirts. Then we'll work on our bowling game. Toodaloo. Toodaloo.
Hey, son, put that fucking thing away before you get hurt.